A Roman public latrine could seat dozens of people side by side over a channel of flowing water, with no walls between them and no privacy at all. Between each seat sat a wooden bucket, and inside that bucket sat one sponge, tied to a stick, shared by everyone who used the room that day. There was no soap the way you know it, no toilet paper, no hand sanitizer anywhere on Earth. And for most of the roughly 300,000 years our species has existed, none of that existed either. Yet people still ate, worked, fell in love, and raised children just fine. So what were they actually doing instead? The tools existed. They just looked nothing like ours. Ancient Egyptians used water and their left hand, a practice that shaped etiquette across the Middle East for thousands of years afterward. They also used natron, a salty mineral scraped from dried lake beds to scrub teeth and skin, the very same substance their embalmers packed into bodies to preserve them for the afterlife. Across the ancient Middle East, India, and parts of Africa, entirely separate cultures independently reached for the same solution: chew sticks. In the Middle East, that meant a twig from the Salvador persica tree, frayed at one end into soft bristles and dragged across the teeth. In India, a similar twig was called a datin, often cut fresh each morning from a neem tree. That twig, called a miswak in Arabic sources, released natural antibacterial compounds into the mouth. And modern dental studies have confirmed it genuinely reduced plaque. Greeks and Romans took a different approach entirely, coating themselves in olive oil before a workout or a bath, then scraping it off with a curved bronze tool called a strigil. The oil lifted dirt and dead skin as it was worked in, and the strigil dragged all of it away in one motion: sweat, oil, and grime together. That scraped off residue, called gloios, wasn't simply discarded. Bottled sweat and oil, scraped from famous gladiators, was reportedly sold to spectators outside the arena as a beauty treatment and a supposed medicine. And that shared sponge on a stick, the tersorium, was rinsed in a bucket of vinegar or salt water between uses, then passed to the next person waiting in line. Here's the part most people get wrong. Many assume that sponge touched the body directly, exactly like toilet paper. Some historians argue it was more likely used to wipe the stone seat itself, cleaning the rim between sitters rather than skin. Either explanation lands on the same underlying problem. One tool, passed hand to hand, all day, every single day, with no way to fully sterilize it in between. And it wasn't all careless guesswork. Ash and animal fat boiled together produced a crude soap-like substance as early as 2800 BCE in Babylon, one of the earliest recorded chemical reactions humans deliberately engineered. That recipe survives on a clay tablet, making it one of the oldest written formulas we have for anything. Historians believe it was used mainly on wool and hair rather than skin, but the underlying chemistry, the reaction that still makes soap today, was correct. Public bathhouses were everywhere in the Roman Empire, and bathing was a genuine daily social ritual, a place to gossip and do business, not the rare event popular imagination suggests. The largest could hold well over 1,000 bathers at once, alongside libraries, gyms, and food stalls, closer to a modern shopping mall than a simple wash. Urine, collected in jars left on street corners for exactly this purpose, was even used in laundering because the ammonia inside it worked as a real, functional cleaning agent on cloth. The Emperor Vespasian even taxed it, and when his own son complained the money smelled bad, he reportedly held up a coin and said, "Money doesn't stink," a line still quoted almost 2,000 years later. None of it was soap in the modern sense, but none of it was reckless improvisation either. So if parts of this system were genuinely functional, why does the evidence from their own bodies tell such a different story? Archaeologists studying ancient latrines and cesspits keep finding the same thing over and over again. Eggs from roundworm and whipworm preserved intact for thousands of years inside fossilized human waste. Entire Roman cities with their advanced sewers, aqueducts, and public toilets show parasite levels that didn't fall compared to the Iron Age societies before them. And by some measures, infection actually went up. In York, England, archaeologists uncovered a single fossilized human stool from a Viking-era settlement packed with thousands of parasite eggs, now nicknamed the Lloyd's Bank coprolite. Researchers examining a Roman-era sewer at Herculaneum found something similar, alongside the fish bones and food scraps that let them map out the ancient diet. The same sediment was packed with parasite eggs from the people who had eaten it. Dental calculus, the hardened plaque still stuck to ancient skeletons today, shows widespread gum disease and tooth loss going back tens of thousands of years, long before refined sugar ever existed. The infrastructure looked advanced. The biology tells you it didn't function the way we assume it did. Shared tools were part of the problem. Shared water was a bigger one. Bath water in a communal Roman bath was rarely changed between users, and it circulated the same oils, sweat, and pathogens across dozens of bodies over a single day. The shared sponge worked no differently. Whatever it touched on one person, it carried straight to the next, spreading intestinal parasites through what researchers now call the fecal-oral cycle. There was a second loop behind it too. Romans spread untreated human waste on their fields as crop fertilizer, and unless it was composted for months first, the parasite eggs inside it rode straight back into the food supply. Chronic parasite infection wasn't just uncomfortable. Skeletal evidence shows it could slow childhood growth when infections went untreated for years at a time. So the parasites weren't a failure of effort. They were the direct cost of living in close, shared, unfiltered contact with everyone else's bodies, day after day for an entire lifetime. You'd expect things to improve with time. For a while, much of Europe got worse instead. After waves of plague swept through medieval Europe, many physicians came to believe that hot water opened the skin's pores and let disease pour in. That fear didn't erase an old habit overnight. Medieval Europe had actually kept bathhouses thriving for centuries after Rome fell, with medieval Paris alone home to more than 24 of them by the 1200s. It was specifically after the Black Death in the 1340s that these same bathhouses emptied out over the following 2 centuries, replaced by dry rubbing and heavy perfume instead of water. Chamber pots were emptied straight out of upper windows into the street below, with only a shouted warning to anyone walking underneath. Some historians connect the resulting filth directly to the very outbreaks people were desperately trying to avoid in the first place. That decline wasn't universal. While parts of medieval Europe pulled away from water, the Islamic world was moving in the opposite direction at the very same time. Public bathhouses called hammams remained central to daily life across cities from Baghdad to Cordoba, reinforced by a religious emphasis on washing before prayer. Physicians working in this tradition, including Ibn Sina, wrote extensively on hygiene and preventive medicine, work that later filtered back into European medical thought. It took centuries to reconnect cleanliness with health instead of superstition and fear. Even in the 1840s, a physician named Ignaz Semmelweis was mocked by his own colleagues for suggesting doctors simply wash their hands between patients. He noticed death rates drop sharply on wards where hands were washed, but nobody yet knew why, because germs themselves hadn't been proven to exist yet. He died in an asylum, still dismissed, only a few years before Louis Pasteur's work finally proved he had been right all along. Once germ theory was accepted, the changes came fast. Chlorinated water supplies, routine hand washing, and modern sewage treatment spread across cities within a few decades. Average life expectancy in industrialized nations climbed dramatically in that same window, and historians consistently point to clean water and basic hygiene as the biggest single factor ahead of any individual medicine. That's really what separates primitive from ineffective. Ancient people weren't ignorant about cleanliness. They built latrines, invented scrapers, brewed soap-like substances, and in some eras bathed every single day. What they were missing wasn't effort. It was the microscopic understanding of why any of it actually mattered. They could see dirt, and they built entire rituals around removing it. What they couldn't see were the organisms living inside it, spreading from body to body, regardless of how hard anyone scrubbed. And that single invisible gap is what modern soap, clean water, and germ theory finally closed, turning cleanliness from a ritual into an actual working science. If seeing the hidden science behind everyday history fascinates you, hit subscribe, because almost everything you think you already understand has a deeper layer underneath it.